Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Rounaghi, your mayor of Laguna Beach, and I'm here doing fair game with Stu News. Usually, I'm here with Tom Johnson, but he's out this week, so he'll be back soon. And in the meantime, I will be asking the questions. So we'll see how I do. I'm here today with two special guests. We have Zach Cornwell and Anthony Vieira, and our topic today is something that very few people fully understand. It's something that I really didn't understand before I got involved with the city, but it impacts all of our lives every single day, and that is parking regulations. And I'm talking about this because one of the priorities of the Laguna Beach City Council is addressing vacancies, especially and making it easier for small businesses to fill those vacancies. We recently did an economic study, and we found that in Laguna Beach we have an 8.3% vacancy rate, which none of us want. It's even more significant when we compare it to some of our neighbors. Newport Beach, they're at 2.1%. Dana Point, 1.6%. San Clemente, I think, is around that range. I didn't write it down. And so addressing those vacancies are something that there's a lot of support for in town. And the question is, how do we go about doing it? And at the high level, I think we need predictability, common sense, and timeliness. And that's what the report actually recommended. But today I want to get into the specifics of parking requirements because I think there's something that really surprise people when you can understand them. And I see them as one of the most important regulatory barriers to filling these vacancies. So, um, Zach, I want to start with you by just having you introduce yourself and I think so Zach, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, my name's Zach Cornwell. I own a wig sandwich shop in Laguna Beach on Pearl Street and Coast Highway. I think I was invited to this because it took me a long time to get through my process due to parking. And yeah, would you like me to share the story here, or would you want to ask me pinpointed questions on it?
Yeah, so I mean you grew up here and you're a local guy.
Oh yes, I'm a local guy. I started this project when I was like 28 years old. I think I was 32 by the time I opened my doors. But yeah, I grew up, went to the school here, and I really wanted to open up a sandwich shop in Laguna. Partially because we just didn't have one ever, like in my life here, other than Gallows for maybe a year. And also, I just wanted to be back in the community again. Like many my age, we had to leave, go work, and whatnot. And Laguna's just such a special place. So I wanted to do, yeah, it was my life goal to come back, open a sandwich shop, and serve our town.
Cool. So you were so excited about starting a business in town, a small business, which is what we want in Laguna Beach. What was the process like? How long did it take?
Yeah, the process was pretty terrible. It took 27 months to get final approval from the city, and that's building permits and everything. And then it took me about, uh, another year for build out and I think some additional permits and health department and whatnot. So all in all, it took me 3 years to open up. At one point, the head of the planning department told me that this was never going to happen. We were 6 months in, and he said that it was not going to be possible to happen, which was pretty demoralizing. I'm clearly not one that lets stuff like that get to me, but yeah, it was a tough pill to swallow, and I kept pushing forward and found the right people and the right team and spent enough money and we eventually got it done.
Got it. And so a 3-year process, would you recommend, do you think a lot of small businesses are willing to spend 3 years navigating a regulatory process to open up a business?
No, like in fact, I want to. My original goal is to continue to do this in Laguna, not another Wigs, but I think there's a lot of gaps in Laguna's food, and especially in the fast casual department that's catered towards locals. I think there's a lot of great restaurants downtown. If you're on vacation, willing to spend a few extra bucks, great. But if you just want to get a quick bite to eat as a local, we could use a lot more. So to answer your question directly, like I am no longer pursuing that career path at this moment, given Laguna's parking regulations. It costs too much money, it costs too much stress on families, and it just takes too much time. And no landlord's willing to give you a 3 year, waiting period or grace period on rent. That's just not how it's going to work. So they'll take whoever, they'll take the next art gallery in there or whatever business was there before.
Got it. And so let's get into the parking requirements. So Anthony, if you could share the staff report from the Wig Sandwiches um, approval, and Zach, what we're going to see is what's required under our code for your parking requirements. But ahead of this conversation, you were telling me that it was actually more than that. So can you go into that?
Yeah, so because I share the building with a Spigot Liquor, which has been there for almost 90 years, or I'm sorry, over 90 years now, almost 100 years. Excuse the trash in the back. We had to, I guess, modernize the parking for both buildings. And at one point, they told us that the Spigot Liquor was a convenience store, and we needed a total of 27 parking spaces for the two buildings or the two businesses. Sorry, which I think Alex, you pointed out, would take more than the square footage of the entire property. Correct?
Yeah, because I think 300 square feet is like the total for a parking space all in with road and everything, and then we multiply that by 27, and I don't have the number in front of me, but it's more than the size of the lot, which means that it's literally impossible to do. So that thankfully 27 was not what the rules were ultimately, but as you can see here, 14 spaces would be required. And when I do 300 times 14, I get 4,200. So that's more than half of the lot would have had to be parking. Is that possible with the current site?
No, like given the fact that there's rules on how to access the parking, right? You can't have people back
Hmm.
out. Yeah, so it would be impossible even as is at 14. And then not to mention, like I know the 27 thing got resolved, but that was another 2, 3 months of research on our end to try to figure out how we could get, our planner to convince them that the liquor store could be a liquor store, not a convenience store, essentially, and finding precedent. So there's all these setbacks along the way. Uh, that were just yeah, they were just really heartbreaking and costly and I wouldn't want to do it again.
And ultimately, you were able to open because can you explain why you were able to?
Yeah, so essentially I had to well one we had to make some cuts on my end. So we're talking about an 800 square foot sandwich shop with a 300 square foot patio in the back. I had to cut that patio out. We had to put a bike rack in, although I don't even think it reduced parking. I think we just did that out of the kindness of our hearts. And then we also had to make the building historic, which, the building is historic. Is it the most beautiful? No, but it's almost 100 years old. And it does add to the character of the neighborhood. But that was a long process as well, in a costly process. We had to find and hire a historian, pay them tens of thousands of dollars or whatever that fee was, and to write a report to convince the heritage committee that the building was historic. So that was essentially what got us across the finish line.
Got it. So it sounds like I have three words that I'm going to use to describe your process. Unpredictable. You said that at times you thought you wouldn't even be able to open. At times you were told 27 spaces, and so it was an unpredictable process. It was a long process, 3 years. That's very long. And as we know, time is money. Time is our most valuable asset that all of us have as individuals, but also as business owners. And then it was costly. You had to pay for studies, you had to pay for consultants. Those are the three things that the Cosmont report identified as being barriers for small business. And um, so I think, that this is very helpful. When you talk to customers, do you ever hear from them, oh, you don't have enough parking? Is that a complaint that you hear?
People talk about how difficult parking is in Laguna in general,
Yep.
but I don't think that's ever changed. I don't get direct complaints from my customers about our parking. People are happy to find a street spot, park in our lot. They do what they do. They don't complain to us about it. And I'm sure if we're too busy and the parking's full, they go on to the next spot, walk, down the street to Adolfo's or Active Culture. Who knows?
Got it. And the question really isn't whether we have a parking problem, because as you said, I think we all agree there is a parking problem, but especially during the summer months. But really, if we were to require 14 spaces, there wouldn't be a wig sandwich shop. Is that a fair characterization, Zach?
Yes, that is fair because it would be impossible.
So the choice isn't really between whether we want parking or not. The choice is whether we want to fill, what was, I think it was vacant at the time that you got involved.
Yeah, so
You
it
fill
was an old wig shop,
an
right?
old wig shop and fill it with, a sandwich shop that ultimately mostly serves locals. I think that's
Yeah. And I
that's an
think you
important
mentioned,
distinction.
sorry to interrupt, but I think you mentioned common sense earlier too. And it's like common sense would say you could put sandwich shop in an 800 square foot vacant commercial building, right? Well, I don't see a problem with that.
Yep.
Um, and a 3-year process, having been told it wasn't going to happen at some points, that's not common sense.
Yeah, it's hard to argue it is. So yeah, Anthony, if you can take away the screen, and Anthony, I want to ask you a question. Is Zach's experience as a small business owner and entrepreneur, is that something that you hear is parking, fulfilling the parking requirements and having to play? It almost seems like it's like you have to be it's a special game of math to be able to fulfill our parking requirements. Is this an experience isolated to Zach and Wig sandwiches, or do you hear this when you're having conversations with property owners and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mr. Mayor. I actually, although not the project planner on WIGS, I do remember meeting Zach very early on in his process, probably before he submitted his application to the city and just doing some early due diligence. I probably didn't provide the most encouraging feedback. And these are the difficult conversations that our planning staff have on a fairly regular basis with hopeful business owners, at least for this type of a land use. So, food service is one of those uses that requires more parking than some other land use categories per the city's parking regulations. It's considered a more intensive use of a property than, say, retail or general office. So these are the conversations that we have with customers fairly frequently. I will say that there seems to be a good amount of interest in establishing food services in the city. So all the planners are pretty well versed in the land use constraints, which oftentimes do distill down to parking, very similar to Zach's experience.
Got it. So it sounds like this is something, and what I spent last week at the, Zach, if you didn't know, I spent a day at the counter and working with Anthony and the whole team, and it's really impressive what how dedicated our planners are when they're dealing with a code that's very archaic. And I heard it twice. People asked questions about parking requirements, and I was just at the counter for probably an hour and a half during my day. So the fact that I heard that twice is indicative of what Anthony's saying, because I was just there for a fraction of a day. Um, Anthony, we know that we all love Laguna Beach because Laguna Beach is different than our surrounding neighborhoods. We don't want to be Newport Beach South. We don't want to be Dana Point North. We don't want to be like Aliso Viejo. We want to be unique. We want to keep Laguna Beach unique and cool. Is why are Laguna Beaches why is Laguna Beach unique, and what does that have to do with our parking standards?
Yeah, and maybe what I'll do is I'll focus on just the commercial district. So obviously there's a
Sure.
lot that makes Laguna Beach unique, but specific to our commercial areas, which predominantly run along Coast Highway, and a little further inland in the downtown core, we have very old development compared to some of our surrounding cities. And if we take a step back and maybe just start with the city's early subdivision history, we created some pretty small lots in our commercial zones fronting Coast Highway and in our downtown core. So just to put it into perspective, a couple years ago, I assisted a city council ad hoc committee with putting together a parking and transportation demand management report. Part of that project involved researching typical development patterns and subdivision patterns in the city's commercial districts. We specifically looked at one of our uh, key commercial districts, the C1 local business district that runs to both the north and south of the downtown. And the median lot size is 5,300 square feet, which is a little smaller than actually the minimum lot size of an R1 single family home zone. So it's quite small. That does set us apart from how commercial development tends to occur in some surrounding cities, which typically are designed around strip mall style development, where you have multi-tenant commercial properties, ample surface parking, and they're mostly accessible to motorists. They don't create the best urban design. They're not very walkable areas. They're very much a product of their suburban environment, right? So going back to Laguna Beach, we have an older commercial building stock that developed out of an early subdivision history. The city's commercial parking standards were introduced first in 1958. So any development that occurred before then had no on-site parking requirements. And so that's why a lot of our commercial buildings actually have no on-site parking. So today we have this legacy of commercial development that either has no on-site parking or maybe has some on-site parking, but is probably considered legal non-conforming. They probably don't have enough on-site parking to meet our current parking requirements for the current uses that exist on the property today. And that's okay. Those existing non-conforming uses can continue into the future, but if someone wants to change a use, and maybe they don't even want to necessarily expand development, they're happy with the existing building, they're looking to pursue maybe an adaptive reuse project, not unlike Zach's wig shop. If the use is changing to a use that generates a higher parking demand for our standards, you start to run into these issues that Zach spoke about. So we have to start getting creative about parking solutions. And oftentimes it's difficult to make that gap work. Here we were fortunate to have a few different strategies that together got us over the hurdle. The biggest one in this case was probably the parking requirement reduction incentive that's available through the city's historic preservation program. But there were a few others that were at play here. There were grandfathered parking credits and also sidewalk cafe parking credits that the city council approved for the property. As you can imagine, there aren't a whole lot of sites in the city that would be eligible for the city's historic preservation program. So Zach was pretty fortunate, although the process was long.
He doesn't sound
And
fortunate based on his description, but no, I get what you're saying.
yeah,
So keep going. Sorry, I was interrupting.
no, it's fine. I'll just wrap up by saying that although Zach's process was unpredictable, as you mentioned, Alex, we were ultimately able to make the math work, but it was challenging from both sides. Zach mentioned he had to hire a consultant to assist with that process. And I think on our part, we also had to uh, think of creative solutions that are a little bit out of the box to be able to find a way to support Zach's project as well. And in this case, it was a two-step process. They had maybe a three-step process. You had to go through Heritage Committee, Planning Commission, and City Council. So those three hearing bodies also contribute to the timeline for the project.
Got it. So Anthony, it sounds like what you're saying is that if we were to impose the parking requirements that are on the books today in our, commercial corridor, Laguna Beach would look more like Aliso Viejo than Laguna Beach. Is that a fair characterization?
It might, yes. We certainly wouldn't have the style of development that we do today, which I
It would
think
look
a lot
totally,
of residents
yes.
appreciate. Today, you have buildings that butt up along the sidewalk edge, or there's a very shallow setback. So you have successive storefronts that create a really nice window shopping experience. And it allows for dining patrons at a shop like Wiggs to be able to have this people gazing opportunity, right? Which enhances his business as well. I think if a property were to be scraped today, an owner may want to try to find a way to merge a few different properties in order to be able to provide sufficient parking and make a project that pencils out because they probably need to build structured parking. It probably wouldn't work as a surface parking lot just due to how small our lots are. Or you would need to have a site that's sufficiently sized to have a very large surface parking lot, which probably means that in a place like Coast Highway, where you're mainly providing vehicular access along that highway frontage, you're setting the building back substantially from the sidewalk edge.
Got it. So it sounds like the unintended consequence of these parking requirements is that it's not consistent with Laguna's history, but it also the only person that can comply is someone who can either buy a big lot, build structured parking, or potentially consolidate lots. In all those situations, you're less likely to be a small business who can do that. It'll be more likely to be, a big chain which is really what our code is not meant to encourage. We want small businesses. So that's really helpful, Anthony. Zach, do you want to just leave us with any final thoughts on this issue and from your perspective as you've navigated this process, and then now, thankfully the Wigs is open. But do you want to provide some final thoughts?
Yeah. Thanks, Mayor Rounaghi. First off, Anthony, I just want to let you know you weren't the person that told me it wasn't going to happen. You had good feedback. You were very discouraging appropriately, but it was not you. So I hope that wasn't directed at you. But yeah, my final thoughts would be, I think this parking code, from my understanding, was rewritten and re-implemented in 2007 as it currently exists. It feels like its purpose was to keep Laguna exactly the same and for nothing to change. And it does a really good job of that. But what that means is that like businesses inside buildings can't change. Times change, right? We have the world evolves, economies evolve. We need to be able to reuse our buildings for different purposes. We're not going to always have hundreds and hundreds of art galleries. They might be something else in the future. I know that's part of Laguna's heritage and we want to keep a lot, but like buildings need to have different uses. And, it doesn't mean we have to tear down and turn into Aliso Viejo or the new projects at Dana Point. I think we can do it with the buildings we currently have. We just can't do it with the current parking code. So that needs to change. Thanks, Alex.
Well, I really appreciate it, Zach and Anthony, and I think this is an important issue that residents want to understand, because residents don't like vacancies, and our vacancy rate, in my view, cannot be addressed without addressing our parking code, because we want different types of uses to come in. And right now, under the current regulatory regime, that's simply not possible. It's not up to me, it's up to the city council. And so people, on all sides of this issue will be able to participate and share their perspective. And and so looking forward to those conversations, because I think it's really important to the character of Laguna Beach if we want to be a place, if we want to be consistent with our historical roots. In my view, we have to really look at our parking requirements and figure out the role that they play in ensuring that in the future we keep Laguna like Laguna, with our look and feel and our pedestrian oriented environment. So, thank you, Zach, for being willing to go through a 3-year process and to open a great small business that locals love. And thank you, Anthony, for all that you do for the city. City planners have a very hard job, especially when you're implementing a code like ours in Laguna Beach. So thank you both, and yeah, thanks for tuning in. So I'll be back next week, either with Tom, if he's back, or we'll do another show on a different issue. So anyway, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.